Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his transport ship watching the blue skies of New Terra grow smaller through the viewport. Behind him sat 3,000 colonists who had called this world home for their entire lives. Children pressed their faces against windows, taking final looks at the only planet they had ever known. Adults sat in silence, holding whatever belongings they could carry in their arms. The evacuation order had come from Earth 3 weeks ago. The Galactic Coalition had given humanity 90 days to leave all 17 colonial worlds and return to the Sol system. No negotiations and no exceptions. Dr. Lisa Carter had made the announcement from colonial headquarters with tears in her eyes, but her voice remained steady. She told everyone that resistance would mean death for millions of innocent people. Jake had been a military officer before becoming a civilian transport captain. He knew what those coalition ships could do. The Zephyrian Empire alone had enough firepower to turn New Terra into burning rock. The crystalline hegemony could shatter entire moons with their living ships. The Voidwalkers appeared and disappeared like ghosts, making any defense impossible. Humanity had built these colonies over 200 years, but the Coalition wanted them gone in 3 months. On the planet below, Coalition ships hovered over every major city. Their message was clear and simple. Leave now or die fighting. Jake had seen the footage from Kepler Station, where a small group of miners tried to resist. The Coalition vaporized the entire mining complex in seconds. No warnings and no mercy. Amy Stone walked onto the bridge carrying a data pad. She was an intelligence officer who had been documenting everything about the Coalition forces. Her job was officially to help coordinate the evacuation, but Jake knew she was gathering information. For something else? Amy never said what, but her eyes held the same anger that burned in every human heart. The communication system crackled to life. Dr. Carter's voice came through from the Colonial Administration ship that led their convoy. She was coordinating 17 different evacuation fleets across human space. Each day brought reports of another world emptied and another piece of human civilization erased. Jake listened as Carter spoke to Admiral Ben Hughes, who commanded what remained of the Colonial Defense Forces. Hughes wanted to fight. He had been arguing for armed resistance since the Coalition ultimatum arrived. His ships were hiding in the asteroid fields and outer planets waiting for orders that would never come. Carter had made the choice to save lives instead of pride. The Admiral's voice was bitter when he spoke. He told Carter that the Coalition was already moving into human worlds before the evacuations were complete. They were strip mining the rare minerals that humans had spent decades extracting carefully. They were destroying the terraforming systems that had taken generations to build. Everything humanity had created was being torn apart for profit. Amy showed Jake her datapad screen. It displayed Coalition ship movements around New Terra. She had been tracking their patrol patterns and fleet compositions for weeks. Every Coalition captain thought they were dealing with beaten refugees, but Amy was studying them like a scientist studies lab rats. She whispered to Jake that she knew which ships were command vessels and which ones carried their most advanced weapons. The children on the transport had stopped crying. Now they sat quietly listening to their parents talk about Earth. Most of these families had never seen humanity's home world. Their grandparents had been born on New Terra. Their great-grandparents had been the original colonists who turned a hostile planet into a garden world. Now they were refugees heading to a planet that was already struggling to house its own population. Jake thought about the refugee camps being built on Mars and Luna. Earth's government was working around the clock to prepare housing for 400 million returning colonists. The asteroid mining stations were being converted into temporary cities. Every available ship was being used to transport supplies and people. Humanity was pulling together like never before, but it still would not be enough. Dr. Carter's ship moved ahead of the convoy as they approached the edge of New Terra solar system. Behind them, Coalition ships followed at a respectful distance, making sure the humans actually left. Jake wondered if those alien captains understood what they had really accomplished. They had not just conquered 17 worlds. They had created 400 million enemies who would never forget this day. Amy continued taking readings and making notes. She recorded the exact position of every Coalition ship and the timestamps of their movements. When Jake asked her why this information mattered, she smiled coldly. She told him that wars were not won by the strongest armies, but by the smartest generals. The Coalition thought they were watching defeated humans retreat, but they were actually teaching their future enemies everything about Coalition tactics and technology. The jump to hyperspace took the convoy away from New Terra forever. Jake watched the planet disappear into starlight and made a silent promise. Someday he would return. Someday every human family would get their homes back. The Coalition had made a terrible mistake when they chose to humiliate humanity instead of destroying them completely. Admiral Pugh sent a final message to all evacuation fleets as they jumped toward Earth. He reminded every captain and every passenger that this retreat was not surrender. It was preparation. The Coalition had shown humanity their true nature, and now humanity would show the galaxy what happened when peaceful people were pushed too far. Dr. Cutter added her own words to the Admiral's message. She promised that every child on every transport ship would see their home worlds again. The Coalition had won this battle, but the war was just beginning. Humanity had survived ice ages and world wars and the vacuum of space itself. They would survive this too, and they would make sure the galaxy remembered why it was dangerous to make humans angry. The convoy jumped to hyperspace, carrying the hopes and dreams and burning rage of an entire civilization toward an uncertain future that would be built on absolute determination to return home. The refugee camps on Luna stretched beyond the horizon like metal cities under the gray sky. Captain Jake Morrison walked through the temporary housing blocks, watching families try to build new lives from nothing. Children who had run through green fields on New Terra now played in pressurized corridors. Adults who had owned farms and businesses sat idle in cramped quarters waiting for housing assignments on Earth. Dr. Lisa Carter stood in the main administration center coordinating the largest population movement in human history. 400 million people needed homes and jobs and hope. Earth's cities were overflowing. Mars colonies were packed beyond capacity. Every space station and mining facility had become a temporary shelter. The logistics were overwhelming, but somehow humanity was making it work. Jake had been assigned to coordinate supply runs between the refugee centers. Every day he saw the same expression on people's faces. It was not despair or defeat. It was cold, burning anger that grew stronger as news arrived from the former colonial worlds. The Coalition was not just occupying human territory. They were destroying everything humans had built. Amy Stone worked from a small office in the Luna Command Center. Officially, she was processing refugee data and helping families locate missing relatives. Secretly, she was building the most detailed intelligence network in galactic history. Every former colonist who found work as a trader or maintenance worker became her eyes and ears. They moved freely through Coalition space because the aliens saw them as harmless refugees, grateful for any employment. The reports they sent back made every human want to scream with rage. Green Valley's vast agricultural systems had been stripped. For rare metals, the Coalition had poisoned the soil and killed the ecosystem to reach mineral deposits. Kepler Station's research facilities were being used to reverse engineer human technology. The aliens were studying human innovations and claiming them as their own discoveries. Admiral Ben Hughes maintained his headquarters in the asteroid belt, where his remaining fleet stayed hidden from Coalition sensors. He spent every day reviewing Amy's intelligence reports and planning for the future. The Admiral knew that open warfare against Coalition forces would be suicide, but he also knew that humanity would not accept permanent exile. His job was to find a way to win an impossible war. Dr. Carter received visitors from other species who had heard about humanity's forced evacuation. The Tau Federation offered sympathy, but no real help. The Epsilon Collective suggested that humans should accept their fate and focus on rebuilding within the Sol system. Every diplomatic meeting ended the same way. No one wanted to challenge the Coalition's power. Jake often visited his sister's family in the lunar refugee camps. Her children asked him every day when they could go home to New Terra. He did not know what to tell them. The official answer was that Earth was their home now, and they needed to forget about the colonial worlds. The real answer was that home was wherever your family was safe, but that answer would not satisfy children who missed their bedroom. Windows that showed real sky instead of metal walls. Amy's network grew larger every month. Former colonists found employment throughout Coalition space as mechanics and traders and service workers. The aliens thought these humans were broken people, grateful for any work, but they were actually highly trained engineers and pilots and scientists who had built entire worlds from nothing. They learned Coalition ship designs and communication protocols and supply chain weaknesses while pretending to be simple laborers. The Coalition celebrated their victory by dividing the former human worlds between the three member species. The Zephyrian Empire claimed the mineral-rich planet. The crystalline hegemony took the research stations and technology centers. The Voidwalkers established bases throughout the former human trade routes. They thought they had gained 17 valuable systems, but they had actually inherited a massive security problem they did not even know existed. Admiral Hughes began recruiting volunteers from the refugee camps. He told them he was forming engineering teams to help improve conditions in the temporary settlements. The real purpose was to identify people who were ready to fight when the time came. Every volunteer was someone who had lost everything to Coalition greed. Their motivation would be personal and absolute. Dr. Carter started secret meetings with Earth's industrial leaders. She told them that humanity needed to develop new technologies and manufacturing capabilities. The public reason was to support the refugee population. The private reason was to prepare for a war that would require weapons and ships, unlike anything humanity had ever built before. Jake noticed changes in the refugee camps after the first year. People were not just surviving anymore. They were organizing and planning and working toward goals that no one talked about openly. Children still asked when they could go home, but adults had stopped talking about acceptance and started talking about preparation. Amy sent her first major intelligence report to Admiral Hughes after 18 months of data collection. She had identified the exact locations of Coalition command centers and supply depots. She knew which species controlled which systems and how they coordinated their military forces. Most importantly, she had found the weaknesses in their alliance that could be exploited when the time was right. The Admiral shared Amy's findings with Dr. Carter and Jake during a secret meeting in the asteroid belt. The Coalition was powerful but not united. Each species pursued its own interests and protected its own territory. They cooperated against external threats but competed with each other for resources and influence. This competition could become a weapon if humans were smart enough to use it correctly. Dr. Carter announced new programs to help refugees develop job skills and technical training. The public goal was to prepare people for employment in Earth's industries. The secret goal was to train the most motivated and capable refugees for specialized roles in humanity's eventual return to space. Every program participant was someone who had proven their commitment to human independence. Jake began making longer supply runs that took him near the edges of human space. He carried legitimate cargo and proper documentation, but his real purpose was to test Coalition patrol patterns and security procedures. The aliens barely noticed civilian human ships anymore. They had become invisible through their apparent HARMLESSNESS. 2 years after the evacuation, the first children were born in the refugee camps. Their parents whispered promises that these babies would see the stars humanity had been forced to abandon. The Coalition had created a generation of humans who would grow up knowing that their birthright had been stolen. These children would become the most dangerous enemies the galaxy had ever seen. Dr. Lisa Carter stood in the secret research facility buried deep beneath the lunar surface, watching humanity's brightest scientists work on projects that would change the balance of power in the galaxy. 3 years had passed since the evacuation, and every day brought new breakthroughs in weapons technology. The Coalition thought they were dealing with defeated refugees, but they were actually facing the most motivated research and development program in human history. The Quantum Disruptor Project had finally achieved stable results. Dr. Kevin Walsh led the team that discovered how Zephyrian neural implants interfaced with their ships. Every Zephyrian soldier and pilot relied on these implants to coordinate their movements and communicate with their vessels. The quantum disruptors could overload these implants from a distance, leaving entire Zephyrian crews helpless and confused. Captain Jake Morrison had been reassigned from refugee transport duty to training the new generation of human pilots. His classes were held in converted asteroid mining facilities where former colonists learned to fly ship designs that did not officially exist. Every student was someone who had lost their home to coalition occupation. They trained 18 hours a day because they knew their skills would determine whether humanity reclaimed its stolen worlds or died trying. Amy Stone now commanded an intelligence network that spanned the entire former human colonial region. Her agents worked as maintenance crews and cargo handlers and service technicians throughout coalition space. They planted listening devices and copied computer files and identified which coalition officers were corrupt or incompetent. More importantly, they prepared hidden supply caches and safe houses for the day when human forces would return. Admiral Ben Hughes had moved his headquarters to a massive facility built inside a hollowed-out asteroid in the outer solar system. The shipyards there produced vessels unlike anything humanity had ever built before. The new ships were smaller and faster than traditional human designs, but they carried weapons that could exploit the specific weaknesses of each coalition species. The crystalline frequency bombs represented humanity's most elegant weapon. Dr. Susan King had discovered that crystalline hegemony ships were actually living creatures with nervous systems that responded to specific sound frequencies. The bombs could be deployed near enemy fleets and activated to send devastating sonic pulses through the crystalline holes. The weapons would literally cause enemy ships to shatter themselves from the inside. Jake's training programs had expanded to include ground combat and special operations. The coalition had garrison troops on every former human world, but these soldiers had grown soft during 3 years of easy occupation duty. They expected no resistance from the native populations because they had killed or enslaved anyone who might fight back. They were not prepared for highly trained human special forces who knew every inch of their own former home worlds. Amy's intelligence reports revealed that the coalition was becoming increasingly careless about security. The three species were starting to compete with each other for the most valuable resources in human space. Zephyrian and crystalline forces had engaged in several minor skirmishes over mining rights. The Voidwalkers were secretly negotiating separate deals with both sides. The alliance that had seemed unbreakable 3 years ago was developing serious cracks. Dr. Carter had convinced Earth's government to fund massive industrial expansion projects under the cover of supporting the refugee population. New shipyards and weapons factories were built throughout the solar system. The official purpose was to provide jobs for displaced colonists. The real purpose was to produce the ships and equipment that humanity would need for Operation Homecoming. The Void traps were perhaps the most terrifying weapon in humanity's new arsenal. Dr. Patricia Lee had studied Voidwalker technology for years, trying to understand how they moved through dimensional gateways. Her team had learned to create artificial gravity wells that could collapse these gateways while enemy ships were passing through them. Voidwalker vessels caught in collapsing dimensional space would be crushed into nothing. Jake had identified the most promising candidates from his training programs and formed them into elite strike teams. Each team specialized in different types of missions. Some focused on ship-to-ship combat, others trained for planetary assault operations. The most dangerous teams prepared for infiltration and sabotage missions behind enemy lines. Every team member had lost family or friends to coalition occupation. Admiral Hughes reviewed the intelligence reports from Amy's network every morning. The coalition had divided the former human worlds between themselves, but they had not bothered to learn anything about human culture or technology. They used human equipment without understanding how it worked. They lived in human cities without knowing about the hidden passages and emergency systems that the original builders had installed. Carter had secretly recruited the most talented engineers and scientists from the refugee population. They worked on projects that pushed the boundaries of human technology, stealth systems that could hide entire fleets from coalition sensors, communication networks that used quantum entanglement to send messages instantly across interstellar distances, weapons that could disable enemy ships without destroying them so they could be captured and studied. The psychological warfare division had been Amy's idea. She understood that the coalition's greatest weakness was their assumption that humans were a broken and defeated species. Dr. Robert Cruz led teams that prepared propaganda broadcasts and terror campaigns designed to exploit coalition fears and superstitions. The plan was to convince enemy forces that humans had become something beyond natural and normal. Jake's pilots had begun making practice runs to the edge of human space using ships disguised as civilian cargo vessels. They mapped coalition patrol routes and identified weak points in enemy defenses. The aliens paid no attention to human traffic because they considered defeated refugees to be harmless. This assumption would prove to be the coalition's biggest mistake. Amy's agents had infiltrated the highest levels of coalition administration. Former human diplomats now worked as translators and clerks in enemy headquarters. They had access to strategic planning documents and military communications. The coalition was planning a celebration to mark the 5th anniversary of their victory over humanity. They intended to invite representatives from across the galaxy to witness their triumph and warn other species about the consequences of challenging coalition power. Admiral Hughes smiled when he read Amy's report about the planned celebration. The coalition wanted to show the galaxy their victory over humanity. Instead, they would witness humanity's return and the beginning of coalition defeat. Operation Homecoming would launch during their anniversary celebration when enemy forces were distracted and unprepared. Dr. Carter called a final meeting of the Secret Leadership Council. In 2 years, humanity would be ready to reclaim their stolen worlds. The ships were being built. The weapons were being tested. The soldiers were being trained. Most importantly, the network of agents and supplies was in place throughout former human space. The coalition had spent 5 years teaching humanity how to be perfect enemies. The refugees in the camps had stopped asking when they could go home. Now they asked how they could help with the preparations for going home. Children who had grown up in metal corridors dreamed of green skies and open spaces. Adults who had lost everything worked extra shifts to build the ships that would carry them back to their stolen worlds. Humanity had become a single-focused weapon aimed at the heart of coalition power. Admiral Ben Hughes stood in the command center of his flagship, watching the final preparations for Operation Homecoming. 5 years had passed since humanity's forced exile, and today marked the beginning of their return. The first wave of human ships moved silently through space toward coalition supply lines using stealth technology that made them invisible to enemy sensors. The war to reclaim humanity's stolen worlds had begun. Captain Jake Morrison led Strike Group Alpha toward the Zephyrian Supply Depot at Kepler Station. His ships carried the quantum disruptor weapons that would overload enemy neural implants. The 12 vessels in his group had been built specifically for this mission. They looked like civilian cargo ships but carried enough firepower to destroy an entire enemy fleet. Jake's pilots were all former colonists who had trained for this moment for 5 years. The first target was an isolated supply convoy carrying rare minerals from New Terra to Zephyrian space. Amy Stone had identified this convoy 3 months ago. Through her intelligence network, the enemy escorts were minimal because the coalition believed human space was completely secure. They were about to learn how wrong they had been. Jake's ships dropped out of hyperspace directly in front of the convoy. The Zephyrian commanders tried to coordinate a defense, but the quantum disruptors activated before they could respond. Every enemy pilot suddenly found their neural implants overloaded with painful feedback. Ships drifted helplessly as their crews writhed in agony. The supply vessels were captured intact, along with their valuable cargo and detailed navigation data. Dr. Lisa Carter monitored the operation from the command bunker on Luna. The first phase of Operation Homecoming targeted 16 different coalition positions simultaneously. Every strike was designed to capture intelligence and supplies, while leaving no survivors to report back to enemy headquarters. The coalition would not realize they were under attack until human forces were ready for the second phase. Amy's agents throughout coalition space began their sabotage missions. Former human colonists working as maintenance technicians planted explosives in enemy ship engines. Others released computer viruses into coalition communication networks. The most dangerous agents poisoned garrison food supplies and disabled planetary defense systems. 5 years of careful positioning had placed human weapons in the heart of enemy territory. The attack on Green Valley was led by Commander Steve Parker, who had been born on that agricultural world. His special forces teams knew every hidden tunnel and emergency shelter that the original colonists had built. They moved through the underground passages while coalition forces searched for enemies in the open countryside. The garrison troops had grown lazy during years of easy occupation duty. They were not prepared for ghosts who struck without warning and disappeared into the ground. Jake's group moved to their second target, which was a crystalline hegemony research station built in the ruins of humanity's largest orbital laboratory. The living crystal ships that defended the station were beautiful and deadly, but Dr. Susan King's frequency bombs turned them into spectacular fireworks. The harmonic pulses caused the crystalline holes to resonate at their natural frequency until they shattered into millions of glowing fragments. The Coalition's first attempt to coordinate a response failed completely. Their communication networks had been compromised by Amy's computer viruses. Orders were delayed or sent to wrong units. Status reports contained false information that made commanders think attacks were happening in completely different locations. The three Coalition species began blaming each other for the security failures. Instead of working together to find solutions, Admiral Hughes launched the second wave of attacks, while Coalition forces were still trying to understand what was happening. Human ships appeared at 12 major enemy installations using jump coordinates that Amy's agents had provided. The element of surprise was absolute because the Coalition had stopped expecting any military resistance from humanity. 5 years ago, the liberation of New Terra began with void traps that collapsed the dimensional gateways used by Voidwalker. Patrol ships? Dr. Patricia Lee's weapons worked exactly as designed. Enemy vessels simply vanished into collapsing space, leaving no trace behind. The remaining Coalition forces found themselves cut off from reinforcements and facing an enemy they thought no longer existed. Jake led the final assault on New Terra's capital city where Coalition administrators had built their regional headquarters in the ruins of the human colonial government building. His pilots flew their ships like avenging angels guided by 5 years of stored rage. Every enemy target was destroyed with surgical precision. Every Coalition soldier was killed without mercy. This was not conquest. This was justice. Dr. Carter received reports from liberation teams across 17 star systems. The former human colonies were being reclaimed faster than anyone had dared to hope. Coalition resistance was minimal because their forces had been designed to intimidate civilians, not fight-trained military units. More importantly, the enemy had no idea how many human ships were involved or where the next attack would come. The discovery of Coalition atrocities during the occupation filled every human soldier with burning determination to complete their mission. Green Valley's forests had been clear-cut and the soil poisoned with mining chemicals. Kepler Station's research laboratories had been converted into weapons factories. New Terra cities showed evidence of systematic execution of any humans who had tried to resist the occupation. Amy's psychological warfare teams began broadcasting across Coalition space. The messages were simple and terrifying. Humanity had returned, and they remembered everything the Coalition had done during the occupation. Every crime would be answered. Every injustice would be repaid. The broadcasts included detailed lists of Coalition officers marked for execution and specific descriptions of the tortures that awaited them. The Coalition's attempted counterattack collapsed before it began. Their fleets moved to defensive positions around their most important installations, but human forces struck at unexpected targets using intelligence gathered over 5 years of careful observation. Enemy commanders found themselves fighting an enemy who knew their plans before they made them and could predict their movements with perfect accuracy. Jake stood on the bridge of his ship, watching New Terra's blue skies grow larger through the viewport. The same children who had been refugees 5 years ago were now young adults serving in the Liberation Fleet. They pressed their faces against windows just like they had during the evacuation, but now they were coming home instead of leaving. The exile was over, and the age of human dominance was beginning. Admiral Hughes sent a message to all human forces as the final phase of Operation Homecoming commenced. The Coalition had taught humanity valuable lessons about the price of weakness and the importance of strength. These lessons would not be forgotten. The galaxy would learn that humanity could be generous friends and loyal allies, but making humans angry was the most dangerous mistake any species could make. The Liberation fleets moved toward their final target, which was the Nexus Station, where Coalition leaders had gathered to celebrate the 5th anniversary of their victory over humanity. Instead of a celebration, they would witness the complete collapse of Coalition power and the emergence of humanity as the dominant force in this region of space. The Nexus station hung in space like a massive metal flower built from stolen human technology and coalition arrogance. Admiral Ben Hughes watched the fortress through his flagship's main viewer, while the largest human fleet in history prepared for the final battle of Operation Homecoming. Representatives from dozens of species had gathered at Nexus Station to witness the Coalition's celebration of their victory over humanity. Instead, they would see the birth of a new galactic power. Captain Jake Morrison commanded the Vanguard squadrons that would lead the assault. His ships had been refitted with the most advanced weapons humanity had ever created. Every pilot in his fleet was a former refugee who had spent 5 years preparing for this moment. They had trained in secret bases throughout the solar system, while the Coalition believed humanity was broken and defeated. Today, they would prove how wrong that assumption had been. Dr. Lisa Carter coordinated the attack from her command ship, which carried the diplomatic team that would accept the Coalition's surrender. She had spent 5 years building the political and military alliance that made this victory possible. The same woman who had ordered the evacuation to save civilian lives was now prepared to demand unconditional surrender from the enemies who had stolen humanity's future. Amy Stone's intelligence network had provided complete information about Nexus, stations, defenses, and the location of every Coalition leader. Her agents had been working inside the fortress for months, preparing for this final operation. The Coalition's security was designed to protect against external threats, but Amy's people were already inside their most secure facilities waiting for the signal to strike. The battle began when human ships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation around Nexus Station. The Coalition defenders had expected a celebration, not a war. Their ships were positioned for parade formations, not combat operations. Admiral Hughes had achieved complete tactical surprise despite attacking the most heavily defended position. In Coalition space, Jake's squadrons launched their first wave of quantum disruptors at the Zephyrian command ships. Enemy officers who had been preparing speeches about their victory over humanity suddenly found their neural implants overloaded with feedback. Entire fleet formations drifted helplessly as their crews collapsed in agony. The weapons that had taken 5 years to develop worked exactly as designed. The crystalline hegemony's living ships tried to coordinate a counterattack, but Dr. Susan King's frequency bombs turned their beautiful vessels into deadly traps. The harmonic pulses caused the crystalline holes to resonate until they shattered. Each explosion sent fragments flying through space like deadly flowers, blooming and dying in seconds. The most elegant ships in the galaxy became the most spectacular. Destruction. Coalition forces attempted to retreat through dimensional gateways, but Dr. Patricia Lee's void traps collapsed the portals while enemy ships were still passing through them. Void Walker vessels that had terrorized human space for 5 years simply vanished into collapsing dimensions. The survivors found themselves trapped in normal space facing an enemy they could not escape. Amy's sabotage teams activated their charges throughout Nexus Station. Explosions ripped through power systems and communication networks. Emergency bulkheads sealed, automatically trapping Coalition leaders in their conference rooms. The celebration that was supposed to demonstrate Coalition power became a demonstration of human planning and preparation. The fortress that the Coalition had claimed was impregnable fell in less than 6 hours. Human boarding teams moved through corridors that had been mapped by Amy's agents. They knew the location of every important target and every possible escape route. Coalition defenders who had never faced serious resistance found themselves fighting soldiers who had been training for this battle for 5 years. Dr. Carter received the Coalition's request for surrender terms while explosions still echoed through Nexus Station. The 3 species that had forced humanity into exile now begged for mercy from the people they had tried to destroy. She listened to their pleas with the same cold expression she had worn during the evacuation announcement 5 years earlier. The surrender negotiations were brief and non-negotiable. The Coalition would withdraw from all former human territories immediately. They would pay reparations for the destruction they had caused during their occupation. Most importantly, they would accept permanent restrictions on their military capabilities to ensure they could never again threaten human interests. Jake stood on the bridge of his ship, watching coalition vessels fleeing toward their home systems. The same aliens who had forced human children from their homes were now running like cowards from human justice. Some tried to negotiate separate peace deals, but Admiral Hughes had made it clear that humanity would accept nothing less than complete surrender from all three species. The war crimes tribunals began immediately after the fortress fell. Captain Jake Morrison was assigned to oversee the trials of coalition officers responsible for atrocities during the occupation. The proceedings were fair but thorough. Every crime was documented and every criminal was punished. Humanity's justice was harsh but not cruel, unlike the random violence that had characterized coalition rule. Amy Stone established permanent monitoring stations throughout the former coalition territory. Her intelligence network would ensure that humanity received advance warning of any future threats. The three coalition species had proven they could not be trusted to keep their word. They would be watched carefully for the rest of their existence as independent powers. Representatives from other galactic civilizations who had witnessed a battle at Nexus Station returned to their homeworlds with a clear message. Humanity had emerged as the dominant military power in this region of space. Species that had ignored human diplomatic requests before the exile now sent urgent messages offering friendship and trade agreements. Dr. Carter addressed the Galactic Assembly 6 months after the liberation of human space. Her speech was broadcast to every civilized world in the galaxy. She explained that humanity asked for nothing more than the right to exist and grow in peace. They had proven they could be generous neighbors and loyal allies. They had also proven what happened to those who mistook human civility for weakness. The reconstruction of the 17 liberated worlds proceeded faster than anyone had expected. The former refugees returned to their home planets with advanced technology and bitter experience that made them stronger than their grandparents had ever been. Cities were rebuilt with better designs. Defenses were constructed that could resist any conceivable attack. The new human colonies would never again be vulnerable to conquest. Jake was promoted to admiral and given command of the new colonial defense fleet. His ships patrolled human space with weapons that made coalition technology look primitive. The pilots under his command were veterans of Operation Homecoming who had proven their skills in the crucible of real combat. No enemy would ever again catch humanity unprepared. 5 years after their return, humanity had not just reclaimed their stolen worlds, but had become the most respected and feared power in the galaxy. The coalition species remained restricted to their home systems under human supervision. Other civilizations competed for human friendship and trade opportunities. The species that had been forced into exile had emerged as the rulers of their region of space. Amy often visited the memorial built on New Terra to honor the humans who had died during the coalition occupation. The names of every victim were carved into black stone that reflected the blue sky they had died defending. Children who had been born in the refugee camps now played in the gardens surrounding the memorial. They grew up knowing that their freedom had been earned through sacrifice and determination. Dr. Carter established the Colonial Council to govern humanity's expanded territory and ensure that the mistakes of the past would never be repeated. The Council's first law stated that humanity would never again retreat from aggression. The second law promised that any species threatening human civilians would face the full force of human military power without warning or mercy. The galaxy had learned its lesson about underestimating humanity. The species that built beautiful worlds from hostile planets could also build terrible weapons from their pain and anger. The people who had accepted exile to save innocent lives could become unstoppable when those same lives were threatened. Humanity had proven they were capable of both creation and destruction, and wise civilizations made sure they remained friends rather than enemies.